Life reading for John Joseph O'Neill, age 49. Born the 21st of June, 1889, in New York City. Science editor, religion not indicated. This psychic reading given by Edgar Cayce at his home on Arctic Crescent, Virginia Beach, Virginia, this 15th day of June, 1939, in accordance with request made by the self, Mr. O'Neill, new associate member of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Inc., recommended by Mrs. 1472, present. Edgar Cayce, Gertrude Cayce, conductor. Gladys Davis, stenographer. Mrs. 1472 and Mr. O'Neill. Time of reading, 11:30 a.m. to 12:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York.
You will give the relation of this entity in the universe and the universal forces, giving the conditions which are his personalities latent and exhibited in the present life, also the former appearances in the earth plane, giving time, place, and the name, and that in each life which built or retarded the development for the entity, giving the abilities of the present entity, and that to which it may attain, and how. You will answer the questions he has submitted as I ask them.
In going back over the years from the present, 30, yes, 21, the definite change, 97, an illness, etc., on back to birth date. Yes, we have the records here of that entity now indicated as or called O'Neill. In giving the interpretations of the records as we find them here, a great deal may be given. This is chosen with the desire and purpose that the information may be helpful in the entity's experience, and that in the application of same may come a greater understanding of the purposes for which each soul enters a material experience. Without respect to the entity's application of the urges that arise from the astrological or the material sojourns, this may be given as a composite of this experience, from the earthly sojourns as well as from the sojourns during the interims. One interested in all scientific subjects, and yet one called very undiplomatic at times, being oft in the position to criticize the very ones that would feed the mind as well as the body. This is a virtue as well as a fault, and only in self and self's purposes may there be concluded the real determination from such experiences. Know that thine own conscience cannot be seared without producing disturbances that may never be healed. Be true, then, in all such experiences with thine own self and thy ideal. For each soul, each entity has an ideal, in the mental and in the spiritual phases of its experience, as well as that which is being sought by the entity. Know that as that ideal is held within self, the attainment will arrive, without as well as within self. From those very experiences there will come into the experience of this entity, during this sojourn, material gifts unheralded and unexpected. Use them. Do not abuse them, by disregarding the acceptance of them, but use them in bringing to pass in thine own material experience that fulfilling of the purpose for which ye entered this material sojourn. In choosing from the records here as to the astrological aspects, these are not because of the position of the stars or the planets, or even, as has been heralded, because of the closeness of self to the cusps in the zodiacal experiences, and because ye are in the cusp age, but rather because of the application of the soul self through those environs. For it is not altogether true that knowledge is power, but the application of knowledge within the self's experience is power. Thus, as those influences and forces are given into thy keeping through the activities among men and the children of men, magnify them, and continue to belittle or ignore that which does or would make men fearful or lose hope, but create hope through those suggestive forces. For mind, the builder, may bring crimes or miracles into the experience of self as well as others, dependent upon the application of same in the experience. Under the astrological aspects, we find Mercury, Uranus, Saturn, Venus, all as influences, in the one as in Mercury, making for high mental abilities, yet in the other, in Saturn as well as in Venus, making for bad choices at times through the desires that there may be a pure activity in the mental forces. These are purely from that material angle. For as to whether the experience becomes an advancement or a retardment depends upon how sincere and how true self is to that which it has and does set as its ideal. For the first cause, or those influences worshipped as God, has purposed that no soul should perish, but has with every temptation prepared a manner, a way, a means, for the more perfect understanding. Still seek, then, his ways. In the Uranian influence, we find the extremes that have been in the experience, as well as the latent interest in things of the occult or mystic nature. These become a part of self through application, or through the choices made by the free will of self, as respecting same. Through the Saturn influence, we find the adverse as well as the benevolent forces arise, through changes that come into the experience. All of these, of course, depend upon the application of will. For each soul, to be equal or one with the first cause or creative force, must make the choice within self. Know then, and magnify same, there is naught in heaven or hell that may separate thee from the knowledge or the love of the Father God, but thine own will. As to the appearances in the earth, these are not all, but they are chosen because they apply in the individual or personal experience in the associations among its fellow men in the present. Before this, we find the entity was in the English and Irish land, during those periods when there were many of the feudal activities between portions of England, what is now called England and Ireland, as well as in many portions of that land. Then the entity was in the name Macaulay, the desire for the exhibition of abilities and physical prowess, as well as in the determining factors that made for the activities through the experiences under turmoils, as is experienced by the entity in the present. The ability to see the ridiculous becomes the saving grace to the entity in its dealings with any disturbing individuals or peoples. This becomes an innate thing. Finding expression of that is a virtue, and, to be sure, may be turned into a vice, through criticism of self or finding fault with others when it is so well understood within self that the ridiculousness of the individual is but the seeking to find expression or to write against the natural things within its own experience. Through that sojourn also we find the relationships of the opposite sex become a part of that innate ability. The finesse, the abilities and the gentleness, as well as the severity as may be expressed, being latent from those activities of feuds. And yet this has been and is manifested in the present entity in the futility of the feudal systems. Before that, we find the entity was in those great periods of activity in the earth's sojourn. That has meant, does bring to the world, that of hope. In those periods that preceded the advent of the Prince of Peace in the earth, we find the entity was among those of the land that would now be called the Persian, as a wise man, a counselor, a sage that counseled with those peoples, using the mathematical activities of the ages old, as well as the teachings of the Persians from the days of Zend and Og and Ujid, bringing for those peoples a better interpretation of the astrological, as well as the natural laws. Hence, we find the entity was associated oft with those who looked for the day, the hour when that great purpose, that event, was to be in the earth a literal experience. Then we find the entity was among those of the fabled as well as real experience, seeking with the wise men that came from the east during those periods. In the present experience of the entity, then, we find that those oft-told tales are accepted deep within because of the conviction and purpose such have produced and do produce in the hearts and the minds of individuals. We find this entity was the one who brought the incense to the child Jesus. In the name, then, Aklar. In the experience the entity gained, the entity manifested its love for its fellow man through those periods of activity and the search for the helpful influences, mentally, spiritually, materially, though the entity then lost sight of materiality. Thus the entity, in its application of and search for scientific purposes and reasons, should lean the more heavily upon the mental and spiritual phases of man's experience in the present, and, as in those days, give the more of hope where that of dread as to the material things is overshadowing man in his search for God. Before that, we find the entity was in the Atlantean land, in those periods when the earth was being broken up, as far as the Atlantean was concerned, and the entity came with those groups for search through other lands. The entity was among those who searched more than one place, to find those places to which there might be sent those who were to be saved. Hence there was a knowledge of the Yucatan land, as well as the settings in the Pyrenees, as well as part of the activities in the Egyptian land. Innately in the present, then, as well as manifestly, we find that those peoples become of interest to the entity in the present, as well as their customs and the motivating influences and forces in the lives of those particular ages, as well as those particular lands. We find the entity was a sojourner in Poseidia in the earlier portion of that experience, and then, with the determining factors as from the disputes between the children of the Law of One and the sons of Belial, the entity was among those who sojourned in the Egyptian land during the periods of reconstruction. Hence we find the abilities arising from those combinations of purposes for the activities in which the greater satisfaction, the greater developments may come for the entity. As it searched and knows self the better, it finds in man and in man's seeking not that of self, but that of the glorifying of a purpose in a material world. Thus the knowledge may be used not only of man, but of man's purposes, man's desires, to signify whether they be of the selfish nature, or those that are more of the universal, or those that would magnify alone the love of a merciful Father to the erring children of men. Keep the faith that ye magnified in the Persian experience, as ye sought for him who is the light, the hope of the world today. For, until there is again the seeking of such as ye not only proclaimed but manifested, he cannot come again. Ready for questions.
Question. Please give me a detailed explanation of any past associations in previous lives with 1472. Analyzing the urges which have been brought over from them into the present life, and advising me what is the purpose of our present relationship, and what I may do now for our best spiritual development, and to obtain the most satisfactory friendship and service to each other.
Answer. Draw upon the parallel of the purposes of each through those experiences in the Palestine land, and ye will have that as may be a detail of how there are and were those periods of the oneness of thought, of purpose, through the varied channels of activities that enabled one to become as a helper to the other. In the present, then, we find each lending that strength in what may be sought in the closer study and the closer application of those tenets taught by him whom ye both sought, who lives and gives and promises to all that seek to know his ways.
Question. If I find it possible to write one or more articles on Edgar Cayce and his work, what type article would best serve his work and the reading public? What should be my approach to such an article, or articles, and to what publishers should they be offered for publication?
Answer. As we have ever indicated, there must first be the convincing within self of the beauty or the littleness of the work of any individual. Then, as it the work of such is sought here appeals or applies to self, and in the conviction of self, so present same. Until such is a part of self, do not attempt to write anything. Then when there is found that which is a helpfulness to self, and the conviction of same, it may be written in such a manner as to be helpful to others. Such may be distributed through forum, bookman, or such publications as are a part of such studies, or studies.
Question. Through which of the two following courses can I best serve the development of a more satisfactory and effective social economic system for America? A. Through my writings, and if so, through what channels of publication? B. Through an association with Gano Dunn, and if so, give relationships and other incarnations with him and influences and urges from same now.
Answer. These become rather confusing, and giving that as we would find as the better manner or means of being of greater service to thy fellow man and the world in the present. The writing offers the greater channels for greater service in every manner to thy fellow man. This may be done in and through channels that may range from the better of the orthodox religious publications to those even of the cinema activities, as we find. Then, through those channels and associations of that through whom or to whom ye would become the more active in such an application, ye will find there will be development of periods of activity not indicated, as well as greater associations of those through the periods when ye were the counselor to the many in Persia.
Question. What should I do with the manuscripts of my two books, Evolve or Perish and The Ultraversity? Is this the time to present them, and if so, should it be through government channels or publication? In either case, please give specific instructions as to people to be used to help.
Answer. As we find, these may be best determined as there is an analysis and a study made of that which has been indicated here as the purpose of the entity's activity and sojourn in the earth in the present. Through the government agencies, approach it through that as would appear to be as foreign as possible to the sources attempting to be reached, but thus making those contacts where the entity will not only aid the channel through which it would go to present his own story, but endear himself to the many. Through Starling, Colonel Edmund William Starling, then. We are through for the present.